what Johnny said earlier about DevOps engineers, I just cry a little bit every time I see someone hiring for that. Because I don't know what they expect or what the candidate should expect when applying for that role. Yeah, I just wish that people would stop doing that. And the non-tech one is that I think pizza is overrated.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, no. Oh.
Nobody saw that coming.
Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Linode makes cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing your enterprise's infrastructure, Linode has the pricing, support, and scale you need to take your ideas to the next level. We trust Linode because they keep it fast and they keep it simple. Check them out at linode.com/changelog.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for diverse discussions from around the Go community. Have you heard? Go Time's sister podcast, Practical AI, just hit their 100th episode milestone. They are celebrating by giving away some AI hardware from NVIDIA, Intel, and Google. There's a link in your show notes if you'd like to enter. You have until the end of August. Okay, let's talk infra. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to Go Time. I'm Matt Ryer. Today we're talking about infrastructure and we're joined by some very special guests and hosts, Jana B. Dogan. Hello, Jana.
Hey, how are you?
Welcome back. How's it going?
Good.
We're also joined by Johnny Borsico. Hello, Johnny.
Hello, Matt.
How are you, mate? How's your week going so far?
Oh, well, just before coming on this call, I was just handling an incident. This is actually a good time compared to what I've just been through.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully they're always good, aren't they?
Well, I'm kidding. Yes.
Fair enough.
They are always good. It's always good hanging out with y'all.
And we have a very special guest as well, joining us from London, actually. It's Shubheksha Julan. Hello, Shubheksha.
Hello. It's really
Welcome.
nice to be here.
Oh, thank you. But it's good to have you. Yeah, so let's talk about infra then, because this is such a kind of big space. And I must admit, this is the first time I really feel out of my depth on this show, because this isn't a world that I'm very familiar with at all. So I'm very excited to learn as much as I can here. So forgive any silly questions. But yeah, let's get started. First of all, what do we mean? What is infra? What are we talking about here?
I think a huge issue is that we don't have standardized definitions for any of this as an industry. So everyone sort of has their own. But when I say infrastructure, what I mean by it is how do you run your software? Where does your software run and what it takes to actually run it? So not just writing the feature or shipping the code, how it actually works and becomes useful.
That's such an interesting definition. I was just having a conversation with my partner the other day. They are slightly a smaller company, and their infra team is mainly, people who are actually configuring things. They're provisioning resources, they're configuring things, they're giving the rest of the organization basically resources and helping them manage. For me, working for a core infrastructure team at a large company, to me, it's building the core infrastructure from ground up, building storage system, building databases, building network infrastructure for each domain. And I think for each different size and the area that the company is operating, there's always a different definition. And it was very interesting to hear your own definition too, which I just realized that it doesn't necessarily translate to me or some of the the other companies that I've been asking the question of what does infrastructure means to them.
Yeah.
So for those of us who have been around for a while, infra, we've had to evolve our sort of a default sort of an interpretation of what infra means, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it used to be that when you said infra, well, I would think, well, you have some sort of a data center somewhere where you've got some space allocated for your rack, and you're gonna get some customized hardware, in from HP or Dell or something like that. And you're gonna mount those things, right? Your 1 or 2 U's or whatever it is, and you're actually running wires and doing all these things, right? Like that used to be what infra used to mean to me. And then, we go into the cloud age where infra is like, well, infrastructure as a service. So you no longer are handling your hardware anymore. We're going to do that for you. It's all virtualized, right? So now you're still sort of trying to figure out how do you get all these things sort of networked together and whatnot, right? But now for a developer, for a software engineer, for an operations or SRE or somebody that basically that far up the stack, infra is going to mean something completely different to them as well.
Yep.
So now it's all about configuration, right, of what you've got. You're not worried about the networking as much. You're not worried about the storage as much, unless you have some very specialized use cases and needs that where you have to know the nitty gritty of what's going on under the hood. Like your all that stuff has been abstracted, from you. So infra means different things to different people, and depending on the time scale you're looking at, right, like it's going to mean different things to different people.
Yeah, I think that captures it really, really well. Like, this is the sort of issue I've been running into as well, because it's so hard to talk about these things, because you have to first define it and bring people on the same page and then start a conversation. Otherwise, it just goes in completely different directions because everyone has their own interpretation.
Is that because everyone's needs are so different then, that things look differently and the way that they have to handle these problems are just totally different?
I guess, yeah, that's definitely part of it. And probably another part of it is that we just never came together as an industry to actually assign meaningful definitions to it. So everyone sort of ran away with whatever they came up with.
That's funny that happens, isn't it? But I guess in a way, a lot of the world has changed, as you were saying, Johnny. The world's kind of very different. So in a way, I suppose that does make sense. But yeah, I liked your definition though, because it's about, your code has to run somewhere. And that's the thing about sometimes as developers, as long as our unit tests pass, and I've probably been guilty of this as well in the past. Don't write in anybody that I've worked with in the past. We don't need confirmation of that. So I've definitely, as long as the unit tests pass, that's it. It gets thrown over the wall and it's sort of someone else's problem. But a few times that's come back to bite me, where decisions I've made at dev time have not played well once it gets into the wild where it's really going to be running. So how important is that sort of the mechanical sympathy, if you like, of where your code's really going to run? How important is that to devs? Or is it okay that they can just, as long as it's working for them and the tests pass on their machine, they just push the code and they can go home?
I think this is going to be a very divisive topic because everyone has very strong opinions about it. But for me personally, I do think that it is important. As developers building just features, you should be aware how your code is running and where your code is running. And not all of the details of it, because that's not really possible depending on the size of the organization, but some basic level details of it, definitely, because it just helps you write better code.
Yeah, that's it. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you've ever had to sort of rethink your approach as a developer, right? So if you've ever had to sort of rethink your approach of maybe how you're fetching data from a database in your application and how much of it you're fetching, right? So a typical use case, right? You're tasked with building, a CRUD web app, right? A blog, say, whatever, right? And on your local machine, everything is fast, right? Because you don't have far to travel, right? Your database is right there. Even if you're running in a containerized, version of your database, it's right there. There's the latency is virtually non-existent. You don't have to worry about these things. Everything's just moving fast, right? Your unit tests, your integration tests are just as fast almost as your unit tests, and everything's just fluid. And it's I'm getting my stuff done, right? It's working. And then it goes into maybe a staging or QA environment where they throw a heck of a lot more data than you have locally, right? These days, you can't realistically have the same sort of production workloads, or a set of data that you can't realistically have that locally, right, to test against. Or if you do, it's really just a small subset, right, depending on the scale of what you're dealing with. Now, your code is now, that was super fast when you're working locally, is now in an environment where it's getting tons more data thrown at it, and things start to degrade. Performance is in the toilet, right? And all of a sudden you're like, how am I as a developer supposed to build in these for these environments if I can't replicate them locally, right? And I'm interested in hearing what Yana has to say about this.
Yeah, I have actually a lot of different opinions on this. Sometimes, like you specifically mentioned, it's sometimes like much faster in your local environment, but it's actually not always true. Like sometimes it's actually like slower in your environment. I think what is the core is our development environment is so different than our production environments. And even like as a thumb of rule, we try to like keep them very similar to each other in terms of like, the operating system, like the tool chain and everything. So we have some sort of like similarity in the production environment. It's just like such a big complex thing to kind of like, bring all the data in, all the external dependencies. Like let's try to, use the like actual like services. It's just almost impossible to, kind of like build that entire complexity. And one of the, I think, interesting things about this breakdown between product teams versus infra is infra teams have been like trying kind of like making things more as a service. Like I was like giving you the example of like databases as a if you're working for a company as large as mine, they're also responsible for databases as a service. So sometimes they're like allowing you to kind of like just give you all these like staging environments, also sometimes like taking care of like just bring in like similar data so you can actually evaluate things before you start to even developing. So it's a completely different approach. Like I think like back in the old days, at least like for all the smaller companies that I've worked for, everything was starting at the development environment. Now we see it as more of like an environment and evaluation of environments. And then if you think that like things are feasible, we're kind of like, collaborating with the development teams. So I think the work style and everything has changed. And I think this breakdown between, product teams versus infrastructure is kind of like contributing to that. And it's, I think, a positive change.
Maybe we should bust some of this jargon because, you hear infra, I hear systems engineering, and I hear DevOps. Do we agree at least on what these terms mean?
No. We don't. I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, let's take, for example, one of the hot new titles out there, right? SRE, right?
Yeah.
And you'd think that like that would carry some sort of consistency, right, from organization to organization. That is entirely not the case, at all, right? Oh. An SRE at Google is going to be very different from an SRE at Salesforce, which is going to be very different from an SRE at Microsoft. Yes, there is a through line between these things, and that goes for the other titles as well. Systems engineering, DevOps engineer. I cringe a little bit when I say that, but like basically these things are going to mean different things in different organizations, and even in different sort of and over the lifespan of an engineering team, right? The definition of that role may also change, right? So it's not. I don't think there is one sort of solid definition, right, of what software engineer, database engineer, infrastructure engineer, ops, whatever it is. I think it's going to be different everywhere you go.
Yeah.
I thought SRE was text speak for sorry. That's how I always thought.
I'm sure a lot of SREs will agree with you on that.
But that's interesting, because I think that sort of makes a lot of sense to me, because it often, the problems that you're dealing with, I mean, that's going to depend on what you're building, isn't it? And probably even some of the design decisions taken at this sort of architectural level of code, that, as we've kind of as you've pointed out, that sort of will necessarily impact how that then runs in production, and vice versa. And that's the thing. I was always interested in what I could do as a developer to make it easier and to make it simpler for things to be then kind of deployed on the other side. I was always very interested in that. And I had a few tellings off in the past, I'll admit it. So we can talk a bit about that too. But yeah, that is interesting. Do you think it makes sense then that will we ever agree on these things, or necessarily are they always going to be sort of different and versatile? And
my main gripe with like not having some sort of common understanding is that it makes looking for a job in this domain really, really hard, because you have absolutely no idea what you're getting yourself into till you actually are on the job. And by then it might just be too late. So like, as someone who spent the last couple of months looking for a job, like I avoided all jobs with like the title SRE because of this reason. Because like 9 times out of 10, they actually turn out to be just like sysadmin or like pure ops role with a different title and probably a higher salary. And that's not obvious because like we don't have common definitions or like a common understanding of what it actually means to have SRE as a culture. We have Google SRE, but that doesn't apply to like 99.99% of the companies out there. So that just makes that super duper hard. And the other thing which is sort of related to that is that because of that, it's really hard to break into this field. Like I used to be a front-end engineer and I started doing front-end when I first got into tech. And then I quickly realized that I don't actually like front-end as much. I enjoy distributed systems and back-end a lot more. So like while I was in college, I took up a distributed systems course in one of my like later semesters, and it was like a whole new world open to me. Like before that, it was just everyone around me was just doing JavaScript and web development. So I was never aware that, you know, there's this whole domain of problems and jobs out there, which is also an option and not just web development. Nothing against web development. I have lots of respect for front-end engineers. I cannot do what they do. But yeah, that's just something I really liked and I wanted to eventually switch to. So I started on my own. I started learning about like distributed systems in general, like by reading papers, blog posts, and consuming whatever material was already out there. And then very quickly I ran up a wall and I realized that like you can only do so much on like a single machine unless you have lots of money and access to a cloud provider. Yeah, and that's when I started looking for a job in this domain. And that was right after I got out of college. I ended up at Microsoft. I was doing weird things with databases and stored procedures there, which was not a lot of fun. So I wanted to move on and do other things. And I was getting more and more interested in like infra and distributed systems and related domains. So I did as much as I could on my own. And when I started looking for a job, there were absolutely no job listings for junior engineers anywhere. Like it was impossible to find anything at all. Because it's just like everyone is looking for platform engineering experience for like 5 years, but nobody wants to actually hire someone, invest in them and mentor them to get them there. And that's a huge problem that I need to address. And like at one point I tweeted something along the lines of like, how did you get started in this domain? Because I was actually curious. I was like, I can't be the only person running into this. And they were just like, yeah, we moved laterally, or like I was thrown into this role at my job because someone else left and it was a complete coincidence and I stuck with it, and stories like that. So like people don't really know that this is actually an option from the get-go. And we actively exclude people who are curious and want to learn and have that drive to learn and can level up really quickly because we don't give them opportunities.
You know, you just shed a light on this that, like, I didn't quite know how to articulate it, and you've done an excellent job of that. It's like beyond sort of being a developer who's sort of building sort of a line of business sort of features and putting together that these straightforward sort of a end user facing sort of a, you know, sort of applications, perhaps with the back end that sort of services these things, where there is a clear path basically to go from junior to intermediate to advanced.
Yeah.
Like you don't see that a lot for the operational side of things.
Yep.
Like I've never seen a job post for junior platform engineer or a junior operations engineer or junior SRE, right? Maybe they're out there, but I've never seen one. I literally have never seen one. So how do you mature in such a role, in such a field, if nobody's hiring for somebody who perhaps doesn't have that experience, right? Is looking to get that experience. I mean, otherwise, where else are they going to get that kind of experience? They need the environment, right? That provides those scenarios and circumstances for them to learn within, right? It's not like you can spin up your own. Well, I mean, I guess you could spin up your own infrastructure in the cloud to do that. It would cost you a lot to learn. But I mean, this is the kind of job where really an apprenticeship model, right, is really needed, right? Like you need a starting point in this field, and yeah, like you said, people are moving sort of laterally, and they've been around the company long enough, and perhaps they started as a software engineer, and maybe instead of be exposed, they're exposed incrementally to sort of the operational side, and they can finally make that jump. But if you don't have that, right, like where do you begin?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, that's exactly what I ran into as well. It's a chicken and egg problem. You need experience to get a job, but to get a job, you need experience. So like, where do you actually start? Because there is a very hard limit to like how much you can do and learn on your own when it comes to a job. of this type, especially if you want to work at scale. Like you simply cannot replicate the kind of things you'll be doing every day at home.
So why is that though?
And it's such a big missed opportunity. Like I'm seeing a lot of like people without a lot of experience coming into this field and like looking things from a very like new perspective.
Yeah.
In my experience, they've been really much more effective in terms of like pointing out the core friction points than the experienced engineers. I think experienced people have a lot of like, they're accepting the current status, and they always assume that like there's all this like layers of things that, you have to satisfy in order to kind of like provide. But as a new inexperienced engineer just coming in, like questioning some of these like things more carefully. And that's sort of like the perspective that we are missing in infrastructure in general, because, there's no good connectivity and we're just doing a bad job in terms of hiring people into this area.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Is it because people think that this is a kind of serious thing, it can't go wrong, and therefore you need lots of experience? Does it fall into that kind of category in people's minds? And because I agree, I've never seen junior. In fact, whenever I think of SRE or DevOps or the people that know this, usually they've been doing it a long time. So it's a very good observation, but I wonder why it is. And it could be that we feel like you can't let these things fail. It's got to stay running. So maybe they think you can't trust somebody that's junior to do that.
I think that's definitely true, and that's on a lot of people's minds. But like, I don't think that has anything to do with being junior. It's just like when you start in a new role, even if you've been doing something for like 4 years and you start in a new role, on your first day, you will be scared of screwing things up. So I don't get like how that correlates that with experience, because you might be like a backend dev, for example, but you might not have done infra, and you can still screw things up, and people do this. There's actually a really, really good talk on exactly this topic from SRECon a couple of years ago by Kate Taggart. Sorry if I have mispronounced their name. Which basically makes the case for hiring junior folks into SRE roles and like what experienced folks on the team can learn from them.
We'll put the link to that SRECon talk that you mentioned in our show notes.
Yeah, and the other thing that I ran into, and I keep hearing from other people about it as well, is like just the lack of resources in this domain as well. Because like a lot of stuff is very academia heavy. A lot of the research was done maybe like 2-3 decades ago, and it's catered towards more experienced folks who have like a lot of experience in the area, has a lot of jargon that's not very accessible. So like I also want to see like what we can do to like help break down those barriers and make the field in general more accessible. Like something I really appreciated was this series of blog posts by Vaidehi Joshi called Base DS. Like she basically published an article about distributed systems like from scratch every week for an entire year. So it's kind of like a whole distributed systems curriculum. And we don't have a lot of stuff like that. For example, the Amazon Builders Library. Like you cannot expect someone who has like just a little bit of experience to go and read about like leader election and consensus algorithms there and actually make any sense of it. And that content has its own audience. I completely agree. Like there are people who definitely need to consume that and they learn from it. But at the same time, I feel like we need to cater to all levels of audience, not just people who've been doing this for a while and are looking to sort of hone their craft in a certain sense. And without breaking barriers, like for people who are coming behind them. Like my philosophy of just being in tech in general is like leave doors wide open behind you as you go through them. And I feel like we don't do a very good job of that in this community, and we need to do better.
That's really interesting that I completely agree with this. A couple of years ago, I actually tweeted something like distributed systems, are not as intimidating as what people make them sound like. And there are like a lot of like pieces in the larger spectrum that you can learn and like learn some of the basics. Like you don't have to like learn about any, election algorithm to do anything, right? You can just go for the like stuff that, you have an understanding or you can relate to, and then kind of like go from there and like, enlarge your knowledge and your background in the field. But it's funny that like lots of people were telling me that I'm actually trivializing distributed systems by saying that. And I think there's like, given like how big of a area it is and how complicated some of the problems are, I think like people are always trying to be realistic about, misrepresenting the field. But at the same time, it creates this like, it's all super intimidating because the field is very large and the work is not very accessible and it's just hard to read. And like, there's not like an easy way to begin and there's no easy way to progress. Like you can't really, it's just like a very large spectrum of things that when we were talking about databases, for example, on GoTime, we also had that struggle. Like, it was hard to create a mental model to think about these systems and different trade-offs and like the larger spectrum of things that you have to learn. And it kind of is intimidating to people, but we have to do a better job in terms of like, surfacing out the entry points and, just making them more visible and accessible.
I completely agree. Like I dealt with exactly that. Like it's such a vast and such an intimidating field to get into. And like there aren't like clearly defined entry points at all. Like you sort of just fumble your way through like 10 different things and then you'll come across something and you'll be like, fine, like this makes sense. I'll stick with it and I'll like go through that and then switch to something else. And it's such a shame because like it's such an interesting field with like so many really interesting problems to solve. And like we're not going to run out of them anytime soon, at least not in our lifetimes, unless, I don't know, like the world ends or something.
Let's not test it. Let's not
test it. Yeah, especially right now.
Yeah. But at least then all of our infra worries will go away.
Yeah, that's the plus side.
Yeah.
What's up, Gophers? Do you have an app in production that's slower than you like? Of course you do. I know. But seriously, is the performance of your apps all over the place? Sometimes fast, sometimes slow? Do you even know why? Well, with Datadog, you will. You can troubleshoot your app's performance with end-to-end tracing and in one click, correlate those Go traces with related logs and metrics. You can also use Datadog's detailed flame graphs to identify bottlenecks and latency in your apps. Start tracking the performance of your apps today with a free trial at datadog.com/GoTime. And here's a bonus. If you sign up for a trial and install the agent, Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. That's a nice bonus. Once again, datadog.com/GoTime.
So I'm interested in Go's relationship in this world because, I remember from the very first GopherCon, I remember that was the time when I started getting exposed to a lot more talks and ideas and things from this world. And it became, Docker obviously is a kind of big famous Go project. And so I think Docker gave Go quite a lot of credibility in those early days because we think of this world as very grown up, like this might be linked to what we were talking about, why it's difficult for juniors, but I certainly have this idea that, infrastructure, it's very grown up, it's very serious. Maybe you can't be as creative as you can in other perception I had, that it's not so creative, it's just very serious. It takes very grown up attitudes and very sort of grown up approach to it. And I remember being exposed to more and more of that because of Go's part that it started to play in this world. Why is Go such a big name in this space?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And my story actually started at GopherCon as well. Like when I graduated, I was mostly doing Java and some C++ in college. And I was hearing about Go. Yes. Yeah, I deserve that. Thank you. So yeah, I was hearing about Go and I was seeing it pop up and I was not sure what it was all about. And I looked into it a little bit and then I decided to apply for the GopherCon scholarship. I got that and I attended a bunch of talks, went around talking to people in the community. I think that's the first time where I met Yana as well. And it was a really, really good time. And people in the community were really, really nice. The language seemed really accessible. So like, that's how I started getting into it and like actually actively learning it. And like, it was already exploding in the infra distributed systems community because more and more people were using it for like these kind of problems. And that's why I sort of like made the relation that if I learn Go, then I'll be able to get a job in this domain, which in hindsight was probably not the best way to go about things, but it sort of worked out. So I guess it's okay. So yeah, like that's one of the main reasons I actually got into the entire ecosystem, because like Go was and is still being used heavily in the cloud native ecosystem, which has sort of become synonymous with infrastructure in a certain sense in the last couple of years. And I think that has sort of really lifted it up in the developer community as well.
I love that. And actually, we should do a shout out because the Go community and GopherCon in particular, Brian and Eric and all the team there, from the very beginning, they had a very big focus on making sure it was an inclusive community and making sure that it was trying to open doors for people where the doors might not be open. So I think that's great to hear a success story there on that. So how was it learning Go for you? Did you find it like tricky coming from Java and C++? Was it too easy?
Too easy because it has its own gotchas, but it was definitely easy. Like I did not have trouble grasping the basics of the language. They were very straightforward. It was mostly just the syntax bit, which just takes a while to, like, it's just practice. It takes a while to get your head around that. But yeah, it was fairly straightforward. And like one of the favorite things, like for me about Go is that how easy and accessible it is to like people just starting out, which also in turn makes like all of the domains where it's used accessible to people. And the fact that it's used like so widely in open source infrastructure projects is just a bonus because it's so hard to get started anyway. And like, especially when it comes, like if it's written in like Lua or like Scala or something like that, it's like those are not languages that people always learn in college. For example, like Go is becoming a language that people are actually actively learning in colleges. So it just reduces that barrier as well. And it's easy to pick up on your own too, which is great.
So one thing I'll mention, and I definitely appreciate sort of your experience with sort of with your journey with the Go language and the Go community. There was a time there that I was a little worried because I'm not sure if y'all can recall, but there was a time where Go was seen as sort of an elitist sort of a language, right? It created there was this perceived barrier, right, to that. Oh, you only do Go if you are like top echelon of people who are going to be doing these ops systems, distributed systems, like creating this aura, right? This mythos around the language itself, sort of, which kind of created a barrier, right, for people who might otherwise be interested, right? But because of that, you could really shut out somebody even before they even try to learn the language itself, right? Just the aura around the community. And I'd like to think that we got past that, and through effort, I would say, right? You saw a lot of community members who care about the community sort of go out there and make Go accessible to beginners, teaching and writing blog posts and in their videos, just talking about sort of the inclusive nature of the community. Like it was really a concerted effort, right?
Yeah.
To really dispel this notion that Go is really reserved for a select few. And that's something that I think, first of all, no technology holds that higher regard, right? I mean, anybody can learn to program, I actually believe so. You need to put in the effort. For some, it's going to be harder than for others, and that's just the way life is, right? But creating these sort of artificial barriers for people to learn things, like that has no place in this community. And I'm glad your experience was a little different. But I do want to acknowledge, that we did have some of our own stumbling blocks within the community. Where with that phase where we were kind of this artificial barriers were sort of being talked about for a little while.
It was very painful in the beginning, to be honest. Right now, like, I'm not sure if anybody can remember, but, lots of the initial criticism maybe Go received was also related to that, right? Like, it looked like a preserved place for elitist people. And if you take a look at the, earlier posts on the mailing list and so on, like, it was very different. And it took a long time many years and efforts, and lots of people felt very burned out actually and left the community and the project altogether. But I'm actually glad that we got to the point, and we still have, I think, a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that first GopherCon, and it was about, I remember the people actually actively talking about having diversity and things like that. So you're right, it was a proactive thing and remains one. It is something that we do have to kind of keep working at. It doesn't happen by default, does it?
Yep, definitely. It has to be a conscious effort. I remember the year I went to GopherCon, that was 2017. We actually had a diversity and inclusion room on the last day of the conference. And it was mostly people women who go. There were quite a few number of men as well. And I remember Russ Cox handing out mics for folks to ask questions. And I was just whoa, did not expect that, but it's great to see. Mm-hmm. And something that has personally attracted me to this community has been Go, as well as Kubernetes and adjacent communities, is that the number of women who are well respected and in positions of leadership and influence, I have not seen that in any other programming community to that extent so far. It's bad, yes, but Go seems to be slightly better at it than a lot of other communities out there.
Great. Yeah, but again, more to do.
Yep.
Okay, so one of the things that I was told off by my DevOps guy was just a specific example. I didn't set the timeout on an HTTP client. And so by default, when you use that default client, there's no timeout. So it basically means that your code can hang if there's sort of problems on the network. That was kind of an early sign that I had that told me I need to understand the actual environment in which my code's going to run. Are there other things that you wish developers knew, that anyone of us wish that developers knew, even if we don't have the scope to become experts in this world?
I have one question for you. Did you think about all of this before the show, or do you just loop it in your head every night before you go to sleep?
What, the questions?
Yeah, all of the times people have told you off.
Yeah, they come back to me just as I'm drifting off. Yeah.
I did not expect that. That was good.
Well, but that's how I learn, actually. So you raise an interesting point, because I think a lot of the learning comes from when things go bad, and then you think, oh, yep, I'm not going to do that again, especially in this kind of space.
Yeah, it sticks with you. Yeah, something that I've seen people get caught by is variable shadowing.
Tell us more. What is that?
Yes, there was an interesting incident that was caused by it. So basically, you were looping through a bunch of machines, but because the variable was already assigned, it was only looping through one single machine and not doing everything that it was supposed to do for all of the machines. So yeah, that's something that's very easy to forget. It gets missed in code review all the time, but it has caused very bad things.
Oh. Yeah, you see, you don't think that. It just seems like a simple little thing that you might do. And of course, it has a knock-on effect. Yeah.
This is an example where I think the Go language is sort of forcing developers to sort of come in sort of a face-to-face with some of the things happening, right? Sort of at a lower level within the stack, right? So if you take a sort of a typical framework user, like say maybe like a Rails developer or Django developer or like a Laravel, whatever, those popular frameworks where that provides so much abstraction, right, on top of what's going on under the hood, right? Even your interaction with your databases, that's abstracted from you. All you have to do is use a singleton, call a method, and all of a sudden data comes back and the mapping's already done for it. Like, you're removed so far away from the interaction that there is another system somewhere that you have to talk to, right? That you start to simply, this is like doing RPC, all the things. Like, I don't have to worry about, the networking or, setting timeouts. That's like framework level concerns, right? So the end go, right, unless you choose to go and use one of those frameworks, you do have to sort of be aware of, right, and start to actually educate yourself about these things, right? When you get a value, when you initialize an HTTP client, well, yeah, like you should read the documentation to see all the different fields that you can set, because, if you don't realize that, okay, well, yeah, there's a timeout there, right? Your code could hang indefinitely, right? If the server on the other end chooses to hang onto your connection, all of a sudden, you're doing yourself a disservice, right, by not knowing, right, what's happening under the hood. Now, I'm not saying you have to sort of, read through every line of the standard library to figure out what's going on, and I'm not saying go, learn the inner workings of networking, understand sort of all the different OSI levels. I'm not saying just get that deep, right, but actually understand what it is to have one system talk to another system over the network. Understand what it means to have one system talk to a number, right, of replicas, right, within a network, right. Understand what it means to say, okay, spin off multiple Go routines where each one of them could be doing something, right. When do their lifetimes end, right? When do they rejoin the main Go routine, right? Like understanding these things that are happening behind the scenes. That way, you're not just sort of, say, oh yeah, let's go to Stack Overflow, copy and paste what I see, and then not really know what it's doing and why it's doing it, right? So it kind of forces you to sort of educate yourself a little bit. But I think that's a good thing, right? The assumption was that developers don't want to learn these things, that they just want frameworks to do all the things for them. Not necessarily, right? Some do want to know what's going under the hood. It's kind of like my days when I was first learning HTML. I was like, we used to have this thing called WYSIWYG, right? What you see is what you get. And then you'd go to websites, you're like, oh yeah, cool. What you could use tools, drag and drop things, whatever it is. And then you need to solve something. And you're like, crap, I can't drag and drop my way out of this thing. Like I actually have to view source. I have to actually see what's going under the hood and figure, oh yeah, there's an errant tag here missing, or there's an unclosed, it's something, right? So you have to kind of look at Go as sort of the view source, right, behind all the sort of the abstracted network, the interaction between your different systems and your database and your application. You have to look at Go as sort of the view source, peeking under the hood as to what's happening there. And that's actually going to make you a better developer, right? And that's going to get you, if you're not already in the operational space, that's going to get you closer to understanding what it takes to actually be somebody in that role, to has to deal with systems, that has to deal with networking, that has to deal with sort of a latency and all these sort of terms that float about for those new roles that we have floating.
Completely agree with that.
And it is very interesting that, especially with a new language, the assumptions are very different because you have some, baggage from other languages. One example is the context package. A lot of people, when they look at it, they don't necessarily actually question what it does. They automatically assume that it's also propagating things over HTTP or, gRPC. And even though, it's just a package that provides context propagation inside the same process. So I think we have all these different assumptions because, we know that other languages or library space is just more powerful in trying to bring all this convenience into things. And I think one of the difficulties of Go was people were coming with that baggage and was expecting more from the standard library than it actually was doing. And then they would be surprised all of a sudden that it was actually not doing that much, but then would go and learn, and it's not a big deal once you learn. And there's always an easy way to get kind of get whatever you want to get done. But even learning what is there and what is not there because of the assumptions and the baggage was a difficult thing for Go, because it was trying to be as small as possible, trying to be simple as possible compared to the other languages or library ecosystems.
Yeah, and so then lots of teams started to kind of build their own tooling, didn't they, to solve these problems. And there's an interesting, Mihai in the Slack channel was talking about this point that orgs tend to have, they end up with their own flavor of tools to kind of address similar problems. And that can be difficult for this industry, if you like, to move. When you move between companies, even, there can be a lot of new things that you have to learn because we don't really have these established frameworks.
Yeah, true. It's almost like you're living in a microcosm based on which subset of language and which additional tools that you inherited. So you have different assumptions and different expectations, and it's a completely different culture almost, right? Each large companies, especially a very strong culture, they do things in one specific way sometimes, and you automatically assume everything is very similar outside, but there's a larger world outside.
Mm. Yeah, I think so. One example is, I know a particular company that have basically a kind of microservice package in Go, and it might even have a lot of code gen, in fact. So, And then if you want to add a service, you use this tool to generate basically the scaffold of that service, and you sort of then do the implementation. And presumably all the ins and outs are standardized somewhat, and a lot of other common problems are solved, like monitoring and traceability and all these sorts of infra problems. Shubheksha, have you ever used something like that? And what do you think of that as an approach?
Yeah, that's kind of what I have used at one of my previous jobs. Like, we had a package which generated like a skeleton of a service, and a lot of things were standardized. And I really liked that approach personally, because it was really easy to get onboarded as a new engineer to the platform and the ecosystem, and like just get started. Like, having standard conventions for like how you write a service, like how you write a handler, or like how you do RPCs and stuff was really, really useful. And like just having that skeleton right off the bat to get started with without having to learn like every single thing was really, really useful.
Yeah, I think that is a good lesson. But the danger, of course, as with any abstraction, is teams might try and kind of preempt that by designing that up front. And I suspect, I know the case you're talking about, and I suspect these things have to kind of emerge in some way, don't they? Or could there be a standard, and there are some Go packages that address this, could there be a standard that we all just use?
I think what you say about like it evolving, like you basically notice that you're solving the same problem again and again and again, and then you try to get an abstraction out of it. But then, yeah, that abstraction can go wrong. There are no guarantees that you will get it right. And depending on how you design it, it can be very, very hard to change, especially if it's like used as widely as something like a new service being generated. So yeah, there's always that. And I think the other danger is that it sort of sets expectation that you don't need to learn about what's actually going on. It's like a magic wand that you wave and like you get stuff out of it, and then you can start building on top of it, but you don't really understand what's going on underneath. And yeah, that's again something that you need to be careful about. Like that, like Johnny said, like there'll always be people who are interested in figuring out what's going on underneath, but there'll also be people who just want to build on top of it. So I think getting that trade-off right between like catering to both audiences is very hard, but it's also super important to keep that in mind when designing abstractions.
Brilliant. Hi, I'm Matt, and I'd love to tell you about Pace.dev. Pace.dev is a minimalist task management and async by default communication tool. Our screen recording feature is actually very popular. Wherever you can leave a comment, just like how easy it is to upload a file, you can record your window or the entire screen and upload it as a video to the team. Sometimes a screen recording is the perfect way to explain something. You know, whether it's a bug that only happens for you, or maybe more optimistically, a new feature that you can't wait to show off. And the showcase feature takes that a step further and lets you highlight progress, which is a much more positive experience than trying to make up estimations out of thin air. So please learn more and start your free trial at pace.dev. Well, it's that time again. It's time for our unpopular opinions. And the music plays.
So you pause there, kind of waiting for it to sort of.
Yeah, that's another thing that I just hear over and over in my sleep. That theme tune for unpopular opinion.
Wow, yeah, there's a pill for that, mate.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like some. Do we have any unpopular opinions on this? You must have one, Johnny.
I mean, you know, we have a guest on the show, so allow them to.
That sounds polite, but it's actually rude. Okay, if we don't have one, then it's just a waste of theme tune, isn't it?
I mean, I can probably come up with one tech and one non-tech.
Brilliant.
Like what Johnny said earlier about DevOps engineers, like I just cry a little bit every time I see someone hiring for that. Because like I don't know what they expect or what the candidate should expect, when applying for that role. Yeah, like I just wish that people would stop doing that. And the non-tech one is that I think pizza is overrated.
Oh, here we go.
Oh no! Oh,
Nobody saw that coming.
oh man! Oh,
by the way, that isn't a non-tech one. We love pizza.
Well, oh yeah. I'm just really sick and tired of eating pizzas at like London meetups, which is like just to see a white dude. So yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah.
John's taking us offline after that comment. Oh my goodness! Okay, so I do have an unpopular opinion, and because Shubheksha gave me sort of the courage with her first one, I'm going to lean into this one a little bit.
You don't like lasagna, do you? Okay, go on.
I've been sort of noticing this trend on the interwebs of sort of people changing the names of their main branches, of their master branches on their repositories and things. Well, I mean, that's all well and good, but rather than renaming your master branch, I'd settle for you rethinking your hiring practices, right? To be like a less laced with sort of implicit bias, right? So I think that's going to be way more sort of beneficial in the long term than sort of superficial sort of gestures of like that, right? I mean, it's fine if you think it helps. If you think it helps sort of culturally within your organization, that's totally fine. A master branch really never bothered me much because I choose to think beyond that. But again, that's not going to carry as much weight for me, right, within an organization. If you do that, but the rest of your practices and the rest of your culture is uninclusive and uninviting for people who look like me. So
that's very well said. That's a shame because I was hoping we could just change that and then we fix racism.
If only.
Yeah. Actually, I saw a heartbreaking report where somebody, I think it was Oxford University in England, they applied for lots of jobs and just used different names. The CVs were exactly the same. They just changed the names and the results were staggering. And honestly, like, I thought we were doing better than this report showed. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes. It was genuinely heartbreaking that just by having a different name or a name that's difficult to pronounce, perhaps, not for me, obviously, I nailed it. Then, it gives you a disadvantage. Just a name. Everything
in the
else
500th try. But,
with editing, though, don't forget.
It's going to be just once.
It's going to be the first time. Yeah, that's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the way of the world. Yana, you need to have unpopular opinions. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, Yana, bring the heat. You've been out. You've been missing action for a while.
Go
bring
for
the heat.
it.
Oh, jeez. Tech or non-tech?
Both.
Whichever way you want to.
Okay. First, tech. I think I shared my unpopular opinion like earlier when we were like talking about like how intimidating distributed systems is, and I do believe that distributed systems are not as intimidating as they look like. Like the main reason it looks intimidating is like it's still seen as it's kind of like elitist. Like there's a bunch of people controlling the entire field, or like it hasn't been able to go out of that like small circle, and that's why it's just kind of like hard, and it's kind of like those people are not like contributing to the state of the world by making things accessible, or like having more of like a broader, maybe some sort of like a I mean, this is one of the fields that like I understand the challenge so well because it's like so big, but at the same time like this is one of the fields that I haven't seen any progress in the last 10 years in order to categorize things, or in order to like come up with like ways to think about problems, right? Like that's why it keeps being at the hands of like a small group of people, and those small group of people are usually actually like they're good, and they're good in their job and they have really experience and so on, but that's not enough. So that's I think it's a slightly an unpopular opinion in my circles that distributed systems is not that hard, but that's my unpopular opinion. The other unpopular opinion I have, it's tech, actually. It's not tech. It's not like non-tech. And it's about SRE. One thing that I don't understand about SRE is, to me, it's true that like we don't know what it means to be a junior SRE or like who's hiring junior SREs and whatever. But I also don't know what it means to be the top SRE in the world. Like what is their job looks like. I have a really good understanding of what software engineering can evolve into. But what is a principal SRE does? Like it's just so I don't have a lot of insights. And I know some people at that level at my company, and I work with them, and I still don't have a good understanding. And it's partially because this field is still like less known and there's less conversation about the role. But it also at the same time that it might be the case that like people at those levels are not necessarily representing themselves as SREs because there's always some sort of like issue with being an SRE versus being a software engineer. At Google, for example, software engineering is considered as a better role, even though these are completely orthogonal things. So people who are like at the principal levels probably finding it harder to identify with that role. And that contributes to the problem of us not having any insights about their work, which is really sad. And it's probably not a very unpopular opinion, but I believe that at the higher levels, we also don't know what SRE is doing, and we don't have a lot of insights.
That's a really, really good point.
Yeah, like you're saying, I don't think it hasn't been around long enough. I mean, you take the general sort of software engineering field, right? Like, we've been at this for a little while, right? So you can kind of get a sense, right? Even at the junior level, you kind of know, okay, who's seems skilled and as you mature yourself and you go through the levels, and you get a sense of, okay, what is a top right sort of a software engineer, sort of what skills do they need to have, and you start, because you're using that as sort of a roadmap for yourself, right? Like if I want to become a top engineer, like I need to spend more time learning about different architectures. I need to spend more time learning about different patterns and different things, like because you think, because in your mind you have an idea of, okay, one of the best engineers, right, exhibits these qualities, or they know these things, right? Because we've been around long enough to kind of get that sense, right? Even if the role looks different in a different organization, there is this sort of a ideal, right, representation of what a top software engineer looks like. But SRE hasn't been around long enough for us to know what that is, right? Yep. Especially if the experience varies so much from org to org, we don't yet know what that should look like.
That's also a barrier against people who are trying to get into this field, because they don't have a clear mindset of like what they can achieve, or they don't actually know what it actually translates into in the like higher roles to be able to feel like confident enough that this is what I want to do in the long term myself, right? Like, because all the roles, all the type, like the tech work is a long investment. It's not like, you can just go in and like make a lot of impact in a very short amount of time. You make impact in a very long amount of, periods. You invest like 5 years, 10 years into roles and like, grow up to like, really high levels. And people just want to understand, what the role ends up being after 5 years or 10 years in order to, invest their very precious time, like into that role.
Yeah, like this is something I've had a conversation with multiple people about who are SREs, as well as like people just who've been in the software industry for a while. And the conclusion that I got was that it's like, for me, for example, I just completed 3 years in the industry. So it's too early for me to pigeonhole myself into an SRE role, because there is bias against that title, no matter what your actual job is. Like people have a certain impression of you when you say you're an SRE, and they will interpret it according to what their definition is. And it's much harder to shift from being a software engineer to being an SRE than vice versa. And we need to work on that as an industry, but that's just something that's there, and we need to like make people aware of it and acknowledge that bias exists. And like more often than not, the hiring pipeline is also very, very different for both of those roles, which doesn't help either.
I think this has been a very important conversation. I started the show by saying this is an area that I really feel like I didn't have a good grasp on, and you've really opened my eyes as to why that might be. So one thing I will say, anybody out there that has a story or experience or something, I could imagine them thinking, no one's interested in this. But we should encourage people, if you've got these stories, if you've got some experience, please share it, because that could be a way that we could start to illuminate some of these dark corners that we are operating in. Yeah, very, very good stuff.
I am brainstorming on a bunch of projects in this area to help break down some of the barriers. So like if anyone is interested in collaborating, sharing their story, whatever, feel free to hit me up. I'll be more than happy to chat.
How should they get in touch with you?
DM me on Twitter. My handle is scribblingon, or email me at hi@shubheksha.com.
Brilliant. I want to ask about those things. We are definitely pushing it for time, but I want to find out what those things are. But what are they?
They're not super concrete right now, but like something I really want to do is like have a beginner's version of, for example, the Amazon's Builders Library, which is accessible to folks who are new to this field. Like you can pick up an article, you can sort of progress through it and make sense of things and then go on to read those kind of articles. And another thing that I just thought of, like it literally just popped in my head based on like what Matt said a few seconds ago, is that it'll be really cool to actually highlight some of these stories and like talk to people about, either in a podcast format or an interview format, about like how they got into this field, especially folks from underrepresented people, because this is something I've struggled with as well, like to Jana's point. Like it's very, very hard to find role models in this area, or like people you can talk to and who can guide you, who also look like you. So it'll be really, really cool to like highlight and share stories so that like there is some sort of a resource for folks to just go to, find like-minded people who are interested in the same things when it comes to technology as well. So yeah, that'll be cool to do.
Well, that's all the time we have, unfortunately, and I genuinely mean unfortunately this time. Usually I just say it to be nice. But it's been such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Jana, Johnny, and Shubheksha. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Don't forget, we have that Practical AI 100th episode giveaway going on. Also, Changelog++ is now a thing. It's the best way to directly support GoTime and everything we create for you here at Changelog. Support our work, make the ads disappear, and get closer to the metal at changelog.com/++. The early adopter rate ends at the end of August. This episode was hosted by Matt Ryer with Johnny Borsico and Jana Dogan. It was produced by Jared Santo, that's me, and our music is provided by The Beat Freak, Breakmaster Cylinder. We're brought to you by some awesome people at companies who get it. Thanks again to Fastly, Linode, and Rollbar. That's all for now. Next week's show is all about the context package, so stay tuned for that.
Changelog++.
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 Changelog++. Changelog++.
Changelog++.
All right, it's close enough. You want to guys go on, Matt?
Yes, I do. I just want to make sure I don't mispronounce your name. So,
Are you writing down the pronunciation?
Yeah, but when I write it down, I kind of try to write it phonetically, and then I realize I don't know how to read that. I just don't want to be typical English person. That's what's really going on.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So go on.
Well,
one more time.
Shubheksha.
And then your last name.
Jalan.
Jalan.
Like, can I get this part of the clip so that I can like forward it to other people who mispronounce my name? Like, it was so useful.
Yeah, we'll release it as an episode on its own.
Oh gosh.
Okay, Shubheksha Jalan.
Shubheksha, there's no P. Where is the P coming from?
Shubheksha.
It's a K.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, man.
It took them like 5 years to learn how to pronounce my name, so don't take it personal.
Yeah.
Seriously? Then
Yeah.
I have no shot in this lifetime.
I changed my name 5 times in order to get it right.
Oh,
I
wow.
still can't use my full name. Yeah, nobody can pronounce.
Can you say it to us, Jana, so we can hear it?
Like the full thing? No.
No, okay.
Too much information.
even you can't say it.
It's like, I ain't putting my government name out in the open. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me?
fair enough. What's your mother's maiden name? I'm just trying to slowly get enough information to steal Jana's identity.
Oh, man.
My name
Okay.
is a globally unique name. Anyways, okay. Let's
Mine
be
is
serious.
actually. Mine
Yeah,
is, I think.
I guess.
Wait, yours is a UUID too, Matt?
Yeah, it's G235119 dash. No, but really, there isn't another, as far as I know, with my spelling, but it doesn't help me now. I need to keep this in my RAM, so can we not don't talk about too many things, please? Okay, Shubheksha Jalan.
Yes.
That
is
the
good enough.
closest you got. That's nice.
What I'll do is, after the show, I'll just record it, me saying it 50 times, and we'll send it to you, and we'll edit in the right one.
That works for me.
Okay, I'll do a little intro then, and then we'll get started. Okay.